How did your parents react when they found out you were having a child as a teenager? The morning I went into labor, Labor Day 1995, I went into my mom's room. My father passed away in 1990, sat on her bed and said, "I'm pregnant. My water just broke and I was assaulted in December." I was 18 when I was assaulted, and didn't know how to tell my mom about what had happened. She started to cry, but asked if I was in pain and could wait until she got up and got ready. She had been having problems walking for 2 weeks because she had blood clots in her legs, which we didn't know at the time. During my pregnancy, I had prayed for months to know what I was supposed to do with my baby. Around June, I realized he was meant for someone else and he wasn't meant to be raised by me. I was working 2 jobs and my second job ended at the end of August, so I figured I would look for a family then. I had figured someone would notice I was pregnant and ask me about it at some point and had decided to admit it when asked, but didn't know how to tell. I never really showed, and since I wore baggy clothes, most people didn't notice. I did have a friend at work who asked me at one point and we talked about it, but since my sister worked there as well, I asked that she not say anything. Over the months I had finally decided to tell my mom, but when I started to tell her, she started talking at the same moment, so I told her to go ahead. She started to cry about our bathroom. It was falling apart. It was an older house and Dad had been gone for 5 years, and she didn't have the money to fix it up, and after she got done, I just couldn't bring myself to give her one more thing to worry about. My sister drove my mom and I to the hospital. When we got there, she told the nurse in the ER that her sister was having a baby and her mom needed to be admitted too. The nurse just looked at us like we were crazy. She asked who was having the baby, and I said I was and that my water broke. You could see the disbelief in her eyes, but she had me go back to the room to get checked and I left my mom and sister arguing over whether my mom was going to be admitted or not. After being checked by the nurse and confirming that my water broke and I was having a baby, they took me to labor and delivery and asked what doctor I wanted. There was the one who was on call, or there was another that worked in the hospital. I just went with the doctor on call. When the doctor showed up, he came into my room and explained that he knew the circumstances of the pregnancy and asked what my intentions were. I explained that I had planned to place the baby for adoption, but haven't found anyone yet. He told me that he had arranged adoptions before, and he knew a couple that couldn't have children if I was interested. He explained that I could go with an adoption agency, the baby would be placed in foster care until the paperwork could be done, which could take up to 4 months. If I went with him, he could call them on the phone and have the paperwork done and my baby would be with his new parents within the week. He left me to decide and never pressured me in any way. When he came back to check on me a while later, I informed him that I wanted to go with his friends, so my baby was with his family sooner. He did say that his policy was to have the birth mother hold the baby after birth, so she could be sure. I told him I always planned on holding him, so that wouldn't be a problem. Shortly after, they brought my mom into the room, within 4, having been admitted and finding she had blood clots, DVTs, in her leg. She was able to be in the room, sitting in a recliner during the delivery. My sister came in with cards for an adoption agency so I could place my baby, but I informed her I found a family. After I delivered a healthy baby boy, I was able to hold him, as well as my mother and sister. The hospital allowed my mom and me to share a room in the labor wing, since there were no other new mothers that weekend and she wouldn't be in the way. Everyone who came in to draw blood or do anything for me or my mom would ask if I was the one who had a baby that no one knew was pregnant. The next day, I was released from the hospital, went to the court and filed paperwork to relinquish my rights and testify that I had been assaulted and hadn't seen the father since conception. My mom had to stay in the hospital for a week or so and I would go visit her multiple times a day, and every time I would go visit, I was able to go sit and hold my baby, feed him and just spend time with him. On Thursday I went in to see him and they told me that he was no longer there and was on his way to his home. That was one of the hardest days of my life, but I knew he was going where he belonged. Over the years I came to know that for me, I had to be sure that I was placing him for adoption for the right reasons, and the only way I knew for sure was that no one was telling me what I should do and I knew it was the right choice. I know that my mom would have supported me if I had chosen to keep him, and she asked me about it in the hospital, but I know that he went to the right home for him. Right before Christmas 2016 I got a letter in the mail addressed to birth mom. I was able to meet my son and his mom and dad, as well as one of his adopted sisters on New Year's Eve. My husband and 4 kids got to meet him as well. He is a wonderful young man, and I know even more now that he went to the right place. My mother and I worked together for 11 years before she passed away, and we talked regularly about my pregnancy and what happened during those 9 months and after. My mom was always supportive of me and didn't try to talk me into placing my baby or keeping him, but she let me know that she would help me if I kept him. My mom was a wonderful woman and supported me in everything I did, even when she didn't see it as the best option. She would give me her opinion, then shut up and help me where she could. She was a wonderful example to me with my kids and I appreciate everything she did for me. How did your younger sibling break your heart? My father blamed my sister for my mother's death, and now that she calls me daddy he regrets. I, 24M, am the older brother to my little sibling, 5F. I was always the one who had to take care of my sister. For the sake of privacy I'll call her Belle. For some background, my parents had me as teenagers. They were 15 and 16 at the time, and even as a kid I could always feel that they regretted having me. After I was born, both my mother and father were practically disowned by their family. My mother had to drop out of high school to take care of me while my father worked 2 jobs just to provide, and even then they couldn't afford a home. They lived with my mother's older sister until I was 9 and my father got his GED and managed to get a better job and move us out. Despite the fact our living situation was better, it was clear to me that they believed their lives were ruined because of me. Whenever I misbehaved like any normal child, they'd use the fact that they gave up their lives for me and I still had the audacity to behave like this. And even when I never misbehaved, they never treated me with much love. I barely got to get new clothing. They'd get my clothes from Goodwill and practically refused to get me anything nice unless they had to: birthdays, parties, meeting friends, and their wedding. My birthdays were always celebrated with the bare minimum. They'd get me a cupcake and a single gift, nothing that I wanted. Despite everything, I was still a child who just wanted their love. But as I grew older, I began to accept I wouldn't get it and made peace with that. I guess somewhere along the line when my parents realized I gave up on them, as throughout my teen years they, mainly my mother, began to treat me better. But at that point I wasn't the child who begged for their love anymore. I never received the love of my parents and I wasn't asking for it anymore. Although I can't say I kept hating them. In fact, my feeling began to feel neutral towards them. In my eyes we were practically strangers. I never got to know them truly, as they raised me with the bare minimum and never had any real conversations with me and never spent any quality time with me. They also knew nothing about me, so them suddenly trying to play parents with me was awkward to say the least. When I was 18, my mother got pregnant, and I guess that was when they gave up on trying to fix things with me, as they could have a new child to start over with. They didn't treat me poorly again, but instead it felt like we were strangers living in the same home. When I turned 19, my mother gave birth to a girl, but due to some complications she didn't end up surviving. This crushed my father. Not only did he begin to resent me for not being as sad as he was over her death, she was barely a mother to me, so there wasn't much to be sad over, but he also blamed his daughter for killing his wife. He was never home after the incident and I was left taking care of my sister. I ended up having to take a break from college after the time I came home from my classes to my sister screaming with hunger in an unchanged diaper while my father was out drinking. I took care of Belle full time and called out my father multiple times, but he always got angry and ended the convo with him saying I could always leave Belle at the fire station. I eventually gave up on forcing him to be a father. Despite everything, I truly loved Belle. She was the sweetest and cutest kid. She was almost always smiley and surprisingly slept through the night. Once she was old enough, I enrolled her in daycare and continued my education while working night shifts. I always made sure to leave a good portion of afternoons empty so I could spend time with her. She always knew who her actual father was, and as she grew older she began to try and spend time with him, I guess, as she began to follow him around the house. Of course that quickly ended after he blew up on her and she began to fear him. I realized she saw me as a parental figure despite the fact she knew I was her brother. When she was old enough for preschool, I found out she was telling people I was her father. I never mentioned it to her and just let it be until she gave her Father's Day card she made in preschool to me. I then told her if she wanted she could call me Dad, and since then she's been calling me Daddy. My father ended up getting a girlfriend and began to change himself as he stopped drinking, got a better job, and even began to take over on a majority of the bills other than the portion I agreed to pay to stay living here. He never really tried being a father to Belle. He did begin to eat breakfast with us, but that breakfast was spent in silence other than me and Belle talking. Fast forward to a few months ago on Belle's birthday, I had planned a party for her and invited her preschool class. My father ended up attending as I guess his girlfriend thought it would be a good time to meet his daughter, as she was the one who looked excited to be here. Anyways, while she was opening gifts I surprised her with one of those kids' electric cars. She screamed and hugged me, yelling how she loved me and called me Daddy. After the party and after Belle was fast asleep, my father asked me what the hell happened. I was confused till he yelled asking why his daughter was calling me Daddy. I asked him if he seriously didn't know why and told him that I was the one who raised her. I bought her everything. I celebrated her firsts. I was the one who didn't abandon her. He was quiet and went to bed. Since then he's tried to play father and talk to her, but he was a stranger to her. She was a sweet girl, so she entertained my father's conversation, but he could tell how awkward she felt and it was clear it hurt him. Despite how selfish it is, I don't want their relationship to get better. After all, just as she saw me as her dad, I saw her as my daughter. I graduated college and I'm looking for a better job so I can move Belle and I into our own home. I may be a bad person for enjoying my father's misery and regret realizing he ruined his chances in having a relationship with his daughter, but I'll never be as bad as him.